Welcome to Messy Liberation, the podcast that dives deep into feminism, business, and personal growth. I'm Becky Mollenkamp.
And I'm Taina Brown. Get ready for another messy conversation through the eyes of two intersectional feminist coaches.
Let's get messy.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. I'm good talking about trash TV because I watch loads of it.
I have always been like, well, I don't watch trash TV, but I do watch a lot of, I guess I should say I've never been like, oh, I don't watch reality. I've always been, I don't watch reality TV, but actually do watch a lot of reality TV because I watch a lot of like HGTV, which is reality TV. And I just never considered it reality TV up until a few months ago. And I was like, wait, this is reality TV.
Well, I watch straight up trash reality TV. Like, that's almost all that I watch when I'm alone is all the housewives. I watch every city. I love them all. I've been watching, I love Love is Blind. I mean, it's so bad that I just watched Perfect Match on Netflix, which is even trashier because it's like all these celebrities coming on and dating. The Ultimatum, pretty much any Netflix reality dating show I'm going to watch, anything on Bravo I'm going to watch. It's a problem. Or is it? I don't know, but that's what we're going to talk about. Is it a problem or is it okay?
Yeah. I mean, I used to be in the camp of it's a problem because it's like it represents like the worst of the worst, right? And also I think a lot of it is really scripted. Like I don't necessarily think it's like actual raw footage. Some of it probably is, but I think, and then there's also like the post-production stuff, like the editing, which producers can make things look any way that they want. But I think the more that I have like investigated where my own feelings of feeling like that's trash TV or that's like it's bad, like I'm just like, you know what, whatever, like life is hard and we all need our momentary lapses of escapism and whatnot, and if that's where you find yours, like then I think it's okay. How do you feel about it?
Well, before I go into my more philosophical or like deep feminist thoughts, I'm going to own up to the part of it that is trashy on my part. But I also feel like it's human nature, and maybe that's not, I also don't want to judge myself too harshly about it. But I will be honest, like, I think there's a part of me that watches the housewives and these dating shows and stuff to have this little feeling of moral superiority, right? Of, oh, well, I'm better than them. I don't behave that way. Like, I would never be like that. And that's my shadow work of being able to admit that I think there is that little part of that there is this piece of me that's kind of like, it makes me feel better about myself by saying, well, I'm not like those people, right? I could be so much more trashy, or I value things much more than like handbags and clothing and cars and whatever. And all of that's true that I do, but also what does it say about me that I'm using that as a way to make myself feel better? So that is the part of it that I don't love to admit, but I will just be honest straight up that there is that part of it of like, well, I could be like them. And even honestly, when I was watching HGTV, because we used to watch a lot of House Hunters and a lot of those kinds of shows on HGTV, and I love them too. But I would find a lot of times my husband and I would both be engaging in this sort of judging of I can't believe they would pick that, or why do they like that? Or, oh, they're so stupid. They're complaining about the color of the walls. So then they know they can paint it. Like there was still all of this judgment of the people I was seeing, which I think ultimately is to make me feel better about myself. And I do think that's normal and human. And while not a great, beautiful attribute, I think it's reality. And so I think there's nothing wrong with admitting that. Do you find yourself doing that with HGTV stuff too?
Oh, all the time. All the time. Like, I like to say that my wife and I hate watch House Hunters because we like to watch it, but we like to hate on the people who are on the show, right? So like, especially House Hunters International, because it's usually like Americans who are going abroad and they're like, I want a house that's close to the city center, but I want a lot of space, or I want a house that has that Dutch charm, but this bathroom is tiny. Or, and then you have people who are like, oh, I'm a butterfly whisperer, and my husband teaches kindergarten, and our budget is $2 million. And it's like, how the fuck can you afford a house like that, like at that price point with like the work that you do? But then it's fun to like hate watch it, but then it's also kind of depressing because like a lot of it is usually white people. And when I see their budgets and what they do, I'm like, oh, they must have generational wealth that I don't have. Right? Because like if I were a butterfly whisperer or, or a kindergarten teacher or whatever, I still would not be able to afford a home like that. And so it's like a little escape from reality, but at the same time, it's it's like a entry point into into reality that I wasn't expecting sometimes. And so sometimes you walk away just being like, fuck, why can't we live like that? Oh yeah, because we don't have the economic means right now.
There's some of that with the housewives too, right? Where you
Mhm.
think, I mean, you look at these lives that these women are living, and it's these trade-offs of that. Like I do that math inside of my head of,
Mhm.
well, would I be willing to make those trade-offs of, well, because they're spending endless hours in the gym and they're spending endless amounts of money and pain and time on, plastic surgery and
Yeah.
Botox and all of the things, and trying to make themselves look like they are 20 for the rest of their lives, and just all the stuff that some of it is like, and the same thing you're talking about with wealth, and this is like sort of beauty and wealth. It's like these snapshots of these issues that we
Mhm.
just are all sort of wrestling with inside of white supremacist, heteronormative patriarchy kind of
Yeah.
things. And it brings highlight on those. And for me, it's like, would I be willing to do that? Because I do look and think, I mean, love that house, love that car. Gee, I wish I had a closet like that. And then I think, but is it worth the trade off for the things that they're having to
Mhm.
do? Or like, because and again, I think some of this is that righteousness of, it does give me that little bit to be like, they're not even acknowledging how they can live this way, or
Yeah.
they're not even acknowledging the fact that we know that their parents are wealthy or whatever. Like, just all of these things that you just want to be like screaming at the TV. So I think it's this little way of me being able to, and again, this is gross, but it's just the reality of being able to be like, I've done a lot of work that I can see you haven't done. And it gives
Yeah.
me that feeling of that moral superiority, which I want to continue to work on. But that's the piece that I have to admit is the ugly side of this.
Yeah.
But now I want to talk about the sides that aren't as ugly. Because the other thing that comes up for me is a lot of the stuff that we call trash TV. And I'm guilty of calling it trash TV all the time. And how is it really, when we think about it, all that different than what a lot of men are
Yeah.
allowed to watch? Sports, right? All these like sports documentaries and whatever. Sports has no real redeeming value, right? I mean, why is it any better than anything that, than House Hunters or Housewives?
Mhm. Mhm.
How is it really any better or different? And yet that's considered, it's a multi-million-dollar thing. Men like build their lives and their weekends around it, and they treat it as though it is something special and
Yeah.
important, and they give awards to it and all the things. And like, it's just, football's just grown men hitting each other and trying to get
Yeah.
a ball across the line. And yet we treat that with some reverence, that those same men will often turn around and talk to their wives about how they're watching this trashy show or whatever. And it does feel like inherent in a lot of this is some real sexism over what's
Oh, for
valid and what's
sure.
not.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, with the sports thing, there's a way that it's also tied into this like idea of moral superiority because they play the national anthem, right? Like they have like the National Guard come out and do the flag ceremonies at the Super Bowl or at the World Series or whatever, right? And so and by the way, like that wasn't always the case with sports. Like that began, I think, during one of the world wars to just like boost morale among everyday American citizens. But yeah, no, I totally agree. Like calling it trash TV and the judgment that we feel so at liberty to make it, there is some misogyny there. And there's always been this divide between what men are into and what women are into. and somehow what women are into is less than or valued less, right? Like, I mean, I'm thinking about caretaking work, right? Like homemaking work, right? Like that was never really considered work. Like, it's still not really considered work, right? Because if you're a homemaker or you're a caretaker of children or parents or siblings or whatever, like you don't get paid for that. And yet, that is some of the hardest work that people engage in, mostly women, right? Or the expectation is that mostly women will be the ones to do all of that. And so there, yeah, it's definitely misogynistic. And I think when we watch that type of programming, and we also engage in the judgment, like I wonder how much of that is also inherently misogynistic, right? What do you
Yeah,
what do you
because I don't judge
that?
myself if I'm going to go watch a football game with my husband. And listen, I like
Mhm.
sports too. I watch sports. I love the local soccer team that we have in town. I've been watching WNBA. I'm very excited about supporting women's sports. And I think sports are fun. But also, I have enough like perspective on it to be able to step outside and say like this is a hobby. It's an activity. I get that these are extreme athletes and they do an amazing amount of work, but ultimately the thing that they're doing is like a fun thing that we do as kids, right? And that,
Yeah.
we've turned into something that has all this meaning and importance and I don't want to take away from the athletes because they do exceptional work.
Oh, absolutely.
And the thing that they're doing is no more important than a lot of other things that we do, like shopping. I mean, there are people who
Mhm.
are athletic level shoppers, right? They're caretaking. We don't have shows. We don't give the same amount of money and support and interest in watching people care for people. That activity is far more important than putting a ball into a hoop, right?
Mhm.
We don't,
Mhm.
we don't watch professors do the work that they're
Yeah.
doing of shaping young minds and give it the same credence and wear their jerseys as we do somebody who's putting a ball across a finish line, right? Like, or a
Mhm.
goal line. Now I sound like I don't watch sports, but I'm sorry to. But so I have no guilt when I go to watch sports. Like it's an activity my husband and I enjoy.
Yeah.
But I have noticed that with my programming, my trashy TV, quote unquote, that I will like it's something I do alone. He doesn't necessarily come in get on board with it the same way I will with his more and more sometimes. And I even find myself like being like, don't judge I don't want to hear about it because I have
Mhm.
so used to from men over the years of my life judging these kinds of shows and making fun of it. But you try making fun of a man watching sports and it's a very different experience, right? And
Mhm.
so I do it myself and I do it with others. And it's interesting. Wish I could remember who, because I love to cite when someone does something, but sometime on either Threads or Twitter or somewhere, I had posted some asking like, what are your favorite trashy shows? Like I love watching all the housewives. And someone came back and lovingly called me in and said, why is it that when it's women's shows, we call it trashy? Right?
Mhm.
What is that? Like, let's not do that. Let's not contribute to that. And I'm like, you're
Yeah.
right. Because we do it to ourselves
Yeah.
too. But I think it's because we've been so conditioned, at least I
Yeah.
have, certainly by men in my life, but also intellectual types, the same type like where that makes me feel good judging these people. I have people who are judging me as saying like, how can you watch that? Go read a good book or something, and
Mhm.
making you feel that same shitty way.
Yeah, and I've definitely been that intellectual type who's been like, "Oh, that's so below me. That's so beneath
Me
me.
too.
Look at how just I can't even think of the word right now, but like look at how like they act and they treat each other like they have no like moral compass, or like this is like just so flighty or just so shallow or whatever. And it makes me think of just like also just like influencers online. Like I know sometimes, or yeah, sometimes people are just like, oh, you just take pictures or you just like post online or whatever. And it wasn't, and this is gonna sound really stupid, but it wasn't until we created an Instagram for our dogs and my wife was like hardcore trying to grow that, that I realized how much work goes into being an online influencer. It is like, I don't think I saw my wife for over a year. like, like we lived in the same space. Like we ate meals together, but she was just always on her phone. And it used to drive me nuts. But it's like, but that's the work of like trying to be an influencer. It's like, there's just like, you're just on your phone every day. You're engaging all the time. You're thinking of ideas. You're, conceptualizing photos and, ads and whatever. Like it's so much work. And I think what it really boils down to is like, regardless of what your personal interests are, like people on reality TV shows, The Real Housewives, Love is Blind, 90 Day Fiance, whatever, like these people are working, right? And I think because it's labeled as reality TV, we just assume that like, oh, they're just going about their lives the same way that I go about my life, right? And we're just like glimpsing in, and it creates this sense of like voyeurism that gives us the feeling that we can judge, that this person is a spectacle for us to judge, right? Their life is a spectacle for us to judge. Like it's like going to the fucking zoo, right? Like you go, well, I don't go to the zoo. I don't believe in zoos, but when you do go to the zoo, right? If you've ever been, like, you're just like, oh, I'm just watching. This is just entertainment. And it's not. Like, this is a person, like a human being. This is their life, however scripted or not, like what they're doing still has an impact in their life. And I think we lose that sense of humanity because there's that fourth wall. And because of things like social conditioning, right, which tell us that some things have more value than other things.
Yeah. And I mean, as you said earlier, the reality TV is not really all that real. And I think most educated consumers of reality TV know that and understand it. Like, I'm sure there are some people who truly believe it's all fully unscripted and it's all very real. But I feel like that's the same people who think the WWE is like real and unscripted.
Real, yeah.
I think that most of us know that like this is not just, oh, turn the cameras on and go about your daily life, because that would be extremely boring. And the fact that these people, and in my case, like with the housewives, these women, they're working really hard to figure out how do they make a storyline. They're doing the role that would normally be filled by a writer and a producer and an editor. Like they're doing a lot of that in real time, knowing that they have to make this entertaining or they will lose their job. Yeah. And so they are working to make it entertaining, because that all of that drama is from them and they're having to create that. And I think with influencers, it's like when men are influencers, they're thought leaders, they're experts. And so often women who are doing the same thing, but maybe it's around makeup or something that is considered, again, we could talk all about that too, because it feels very aligned with this, where it's like makeup is frivolous and fun, but then men who are selling, how to take ice baths, that's health and wellness, and that's important. And right. And so there's just these differences that are so subtle, but so important, because I think all of this comes back to that same stuff of where we're valuing what men do and devaluing what women do and making it into this thing that is ugly or frivolous or, silly or whatever. And we then participate in that, like you said, by saying the same thing. It also makes me think about gossip, because that's another area where it's something that's been historically something that women have participated in and very much still continue to. A lot of the gossip rags, the like celebrity stuff, because it feels kind of like this reality TV and trash stuff. That's stuff that's been more women's domain. And it has been because historically women have been denied education, right? So we aren't allowed to go to universities and we aren't allowed to be in the boardrooms and all of these places. And so the ways that women historically have communicated with each other, have protected each other, have learned from each other has been through this sort of gossip, like secondhand, I'll tell you what they said. Some of it's, and some of it really is rooted in safety too, of like, I better be the one to warn you about that guy because you're not going to hear it from anyone else. So I got to make sure that hey, he's a predator, right? Like, and it becomes this quote unquote gossip thing, which we now treat as something really gross and bad. And like, I still think, because someone called me in on this too, because that's an area where I've always been very high and mighty, like ever since I quit myself I used to read all the celebrity smut magazines. Like I used to read not even People, like the really juicy ones like Us
Yeah.
Weekly or whatever. And I stopped all of that. And then for a long time after that, I felt very high and mighty of like, I don't do that. And that's so gross and so trashy. And someone called me in on that and educated me about the history of gossip. And I was like, wow, here's just another way that like we have been so conditioned to be participants in our own oppression.
Yeah. 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 That makes me think of Lady Whistledown in Bridgerton, right? Because
You had to get a Bridgerton reference.
Of course, I have to.
This is your quote unquote trashy TV. Again, this is like a show that's considered more of a feminine thing because
Absolutely.
romance it feels all of these things are so aligned.
Yeah. And it's based off of romance novels, right? Which it's considered trashy books for women. And so, but yeah, because Lady Whistledown, right? She writes the gossip column for, the elite in London, the wealthy in London. And I don't want to give any spoilers, but I can't talk about it without. So spoilers ahead if you're listening. And
skip ahead like at least 30 to hit that 30 plus 30 button a couple of times.
So, but basically, the character Penelope, who writes the Lady Whistledown column, right? She is overlooked by society. She's overlooked by her mom, by her sisters, because, she's in a bigger body. She's not as technically or traditionally, she's not as pretty, right? And so she's also kind of shy and introverted. She likes to read. She's a very intellectual kind of person. And that was looked down upon, for so long because they thought that women who read and can be intellectual, like there's no room in your head for anything else, right? So like that's literally a line in the show. But she starts writing the Lady Whistledown papers because she is trying to tap into her own sense of agency and her own sense of power. She feels so powerless in this society where she's forced to come out. She's forced to marry for title and for rank and for money. And she's forced to look and dress and behave a certain way. And so writing this column is a way for her to just kind of take back control over her life. And because she's overlooked so much by society, she can observe all these interactions that other people miss or overlook because they're too busy with their own drama. And so, I think I think it's interesting what you said about like gossip being the way that women share information, have historically shared information. I recently learned that too there's this app called Diem. Have you heard of it? Basically, it's like a gossip app for women. And so like you can, for women and like non-binary folks, you can like sign up and you can ask all kinds of questions about all kinds of things and other people can like answer your questions. Like, so they've taken this idea of gossiping, right? And just kind of like subverted like the social definition of gossiping. And they like, I follow them on Instagram also. And they had like a reel about the history of gossip. And that's where I learned about it. But, I think thinking of things as like strictly feminine or masculine, I think that also gets us in trouble because men fucking gossip too. like what is gossip? First of all, it's just the sharing of information, right? It can be harmful, right? When it breaches into the level of like judgment and ostracization and things like that. But if you're just like sharing information about things or about people, then like men do that shit all the time.
But it only gets labeled gossip when women do it or non-binary folks probably. I mean, really, it's when anyone who's not these sort of dominant oppressor identities. But
yeah,
I mean, it has been labeled as this feminine activity when in fact, you're right. Men do the same thing. Again, it's like the influencer thing where, I mean, more and more men are identifying as influencers, but traditionally there have been influencers throughout time, right?
Yeah.
Just not social media influencers.
Yeah.
And with men, it's always been viewed in a different way, right? I mean, I just think about like women who were teaching about cooking, because cooking is seen as this women's activity. Not anymore, right? Now chefs are like, male chefs are they're big names and they make tons of money. But through a long time, like I think about Julia Child and watching the documentary about her and everything that she kind of had to deal with and the way she showed up and was like, this is important stuff too. And it's just always been treated as like, oh, there's our women's hour and our women's time. But she was an influencer, but she was not treated the same way as somebody, I don't know, I'm trying to think of somebody of that same era, but a man who's teaching about something related to science or something, right? Like Neil deGrasse Tyson is an educator. I get that he's got a lot of education, but ultimately he's sort of influencing people. I mean, what is an influencer anyway, right? And so I just think it's the way we label things, where it's like when a woman does it, it's gossip. When a man does it, they're just having, you know, important conversations. When a woman does it, she's an influencer. When a male does it, he's like a thought leader or whatever. And so I think that I think trashy TV to me feels the same. And I do hear like in my head this voice saying, but we've come so far, we don't need, right? Like we're not in that same place where we don't need to gossip. I don't need to watch trash TV. It's not like, but what, why have we really come that far anyway? So like, I don't know. There's still something that it serves inside of me, which is the thing I keep trying to figure out. What is it but could it just be that it's fun and it's escapism? I guess that was the last thing that I was thinking about too, when I was thinking about talking about this topic, was the world is a hellscape. It's a dumpster fire. It is stressful. Like if I spend too much time reading the news, you know, and thinking about and talking about what's going on in the world, I will curl up on a ball and not be able to survive. And I need escapism. And sometimes I read books, you know, and like I do that too. But honestly, most of the time, because of the conditioning that I have, so many of us get about productivity, when I'm reading, I feel like it needs to be related to my business. So I read a lot of nonfiction. It's not really that much of escapism. I'm trying to get back into fiction now, but that muscle has been so long since I flexed it that's been interesting for me to start doing.
Yeah, same.
I finally finished the parable of the sower finally. So that was, and I've moved on to, I'm actually listening to reading one and listening to one fiction. But so like I have other forms of escapism, but honestly, the easiest escapism for me, besides scrolling my phone and being on social media, which is to me is even less valuable than the Housewives, honestly, is like, I just want to go into a show that doesn't require me to use my brain, that doesn't require me to feel heavy thoughts, because I feel those nonstop. And what's wrong with that? And for men, I feel like that's what sports is. This is obviously a big old like gender binary thing that I know is not true. I also love sports, but I think like historically for men, that's been sports. That's their escapism. And for me, I like to just watch trashy TV. And what's wrong with needing an escape? The world is heavy enough.
Yeah. I think about that question too. Like, why is this such a form of entertainment that has persisted? Like, why is it so popular? Right. And so like, what need inside of me, inside of society in general, is it filling? And I think it fills, like speaking for myself, I think it fills multiple needs, right? Like one, information, right? Like that need for just like knowing things and like learning about things, right? Two, there's also this, I find for me, like there's also this aspect of like curiosity that it fills. And so there's this question of like, what if, right? And so whether it's The Real Housewives or Bridgerton or a trashy romance novel, right? A trashy romance novel, like in air quotes, right? There's this sense of curiosity there. Like, what if this happens? Like, what is the possibilities? What are the possibilities here? Like, how is this actually going to turn out? And then I think also just like, we all want a happy ending, you know?
We don't always get that with the Housewives, but I do know what you mean. Because on House Hunters, they always pick one of the houses, and they usually seem pretty happy with it when they do. And I'm sure Bridgerton and romance usually get a happy ending. Housewives, there's even some sort of like, in a weird way, there's this happy ending of like the deliciously like naughty kind of happy ending of like, oh, she told her or she did, you know. So I guess that's true.
Sense of like justice or retribution or like validation of like, you know, your feelings or whatever. And I like that. I mean, that makes me think of like Law and Order SVU, right? Like, I know how harmful the police state is. Like, you don't have to tell me that. Like, I have personally suffered at the hands of how harmful the police state is multiple times. But also like seeing, however fictional, seeing a rapist or a predator or a narcissist or whatever, like get, you know, their time in court and be convicted and whatnot. Like, I'm just like, yes, like there's this sense of like validation that like these things that I aspire to, these things that I want to see in the world, like it is possible on some
Yeah.
level to see that.
Yeah, I think there's that same thing even with the housewives of like sometimes it's the one that you just can't stand and she gets like publicly shamed or she gets told off and there's that feeling of like yeah, or sometimes the one that like it's the one that you kind of like even though she's so mean and it's like that little part of you get to see expressed of like ooh, she told them or she, you know, she stood up for herself or whatever and it's like that. I think sometimes it's also that piece of like these little parts inside of us that we're trying to work out or
Yeah.
my own judgment and then watching these women judging each other. Like there's some piece of that that I think it's working through for me as well, or allowing me to sort of see and express. So that all makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when reality TV and things like, you know, lowbrow or like trash TV, like Bridgerton or, you know, Law and Order SVU, like those things that are considered like just really low level entertainment. I think when it becomes harmful is when we forget that that's not real, that that's not real life.
Yeah. And I guess that's where I'm saying like, I know it's not real, the reality shows, but I also hear what you're saying, like with romance in particular, because I think that can cause such a problem, certainly inside of heteronormative relationships and maybe outside of them too, where there becomes these expectations around gender roles and like, oh, you don't sweep me off my feet. And where's my grand romantic gesture? And where's my big happy ending? And like, I mean, you see, I even see it now showing up on TikTok with these kids in junior high that are having to have the most grand proposals for somebody to go to like
a dance
prom or not even prom now. It's like for and I think, oh my gosh, this is really warping how people think the world needs to be. I mean, then we could get into a whole discussion around porn as well and what that does for people's expectations, but we will stop.
Ooh, maybe next time we'll talk about porn. Spicy.
Spicy. And there's, I don't even know if we could do that in like one, that probably needs to be multiple part discussions, but I think it could be very interesting. I want to finish up with a question because we haven't done one in a little while from someone and I'm going to spring it on you because you're not ready for it. The question is,
surprise me.
How does, I think it to me feels like relevant because we're talking about like, the parts of us that think I shouldn't watch these things because they're trashy and I should be better than that. So it kind of feels wrapped up in perfectionism a bit. So how does perfectionism hinder our ability to be an impactful business feminist ally? Those are commas, business, comma, feminist, comma, ally, not a business feminist ally. So how does perfectionism get in the way? Do you have some thoughts on how perfectionism gets in our way?
I do have some thoughts. So my thoughts are that perfectionism is rooted in white supremacy.
Tima Okun, I just want to do a quick shout out to Tima. And I don't ever know if I'm saying her name right because I've never actually heard it pronounced. But my interpretation is Tema. I think it's Tima, and Okun. I think that's Okun. Tima Okun, who famously put together a paper which we can link to in the show notes, talking about the pillars of white supremacy culture, and one of those being perfectionism.
Yeah, I haven't read that. So
okay. Well, I'll share it with you too.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to reading that. And for me, the way that it's connected to white supremacy is that perfectionism says that there's one right way to do something, right? And you have to get it perfect in order for it to be good. And if we're thinking about really tapping into like creative pursuits or a more collaborative way of doing things, and this takes me back to Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown, there's not always one right way to do things, but also everything is iterative, right? So like how you do things today might not be how you do things tomorrow. So then what's the point of perfectionism? How does perfectionism function in an iterative process? It doesn't. there's no function for it. And so in order to build like something that's sustainable, like your allyship journey or your business, right, tapping into that creative iterative process, like you have to let go of perfectionism, because there's this understanding that what it looks like today is not necessarily going to be what it looks like tomorrow. And there's no one right way to do this, right? Because your context changes, you as a person are unique. So your needs and what your goals are or your intentions are going to be different from someone else who could be doing the exact same thing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And to me, how that another way that that's a part of white supremacy culture is it upholds it. And it does so by saying, by having people, typically those with the most marginalized identities, not taking action, because perfectionism is rooted by being rooted in white supremacy. It's also the one right way, by the way, is always the white way, not just the right way, but the white way.
Yeah.
And so anyone who is not a white man can't do it perfectly, because the ideal of perfectionism is always, that perfect picture is always a white male version of whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
So anyone who's not can't reach perfection anyway. And so it makes those with the most marginalized identities not take action, right? It keeps people from doing anything, because if I can't do it perfectly, then why bother? Because it's either or, right? There is no in between. It has to be perfect or it's a failure. No one wants to fail. So then they don't take action. And then that keeps change from happening. So it helps to maintain the status quo. It helps to maintain power structures as they exist. And so, like, especially I think around allyship, I think business, all the things you mentioned, business, feminist, ally, to me, the most harmful part of being caught up still in perfectionism is it's keeping you out of action. It's not having you start your business. It's not having you grow your business. It's not having you in the rooms that you need to be in, having the conversations you need to be having so that you can have the growth that you want, so that you can change, you can disrupt these systems, right? Yeah. Because as long as women and, people, the global majority, LGBTQ community, as long as all of those folks are saying, I can't take action yet because I don't have it all perfect yet, then we're not in the room and we're not making that change happen. And as allies, it's keeping you from supporting those people who are trying to make that change. And so to me, that's the most insidious thing about perfectionism, is the inaction that it creates and how it then maintains everything as it is. So when I think about getting out of it, and believe you me, I am still as guilty as anybody. Like, I find myself caught in perfectionism all the time. We are so immersed in it that we all will find it all the time if we're looking for it. Like, even in ways you don't realize, this is actually perfectionism showing up. But so the thing that I try to remember is exactly that, of like, if I truly want to make a difference in this world, like if I want to dismantle these systems, I have to get comfortable with good enough. I have to get comfortable with being messy. That's what, and I like this question because it's all about what this podcast is meant to be about. Messy liberation is that acknowledging that it has to be messy. It can't be perfect. It will never be perfect. You're going to have to get in the mud and mess up and look like a fool or feel silly or be embarrassed or like wish you had done it differently. And that's part of it. Because if we don't do that, then we will not make change.
Yeah. Yeah. The last thing I'll say, that was really good, by the way. I was just like, oh, damn. Okay. I need to like sit with that for a little bit as a business owner and an ally. But the last thing I'll say also is like getting stuck in perfectionism. Like, it also continues to center you, right? So it continues to center the individual. And we know that we live in a society of toxic individualism. And so in order to step out of that, like, you have to let go of perfectionism, because you have to think, okay, how, like, if you're a business owner, you should be thinking about your clients or your future clients, right? Like, how are you serving them? How are you supporting them, right? If you're an ally, you should be thinking about the people that you are being an ally to, right? Not necessarily how well you can show up, like how that's going to look on you, whether or not you can do it perfect, but how can you just show up today, right? Even if it's not what you think it should be. And so I think that's my last thoughts on perfectionism.
Well, as much as you liked what I said, I loved what you just said, and that's going to say to me, because I mean, there you go. Like, anything that makes me feel like an egomaniacal turd, I always like to examine. And when you put it that way, I'm like, ooh, I don't like the feeling of that. So that's really good too. I'm going to remember that one. Thank you, Taina. I love our conversations. I can't wait to keep sharing them with the world. Thank you. Thanks for listening to Messy Liberation.
Will you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen?
I know people say that all the time, and if you're like me, often you just go on to the next podcast, but truly, taking that moment to do that will really help us reach a wider audience.
Thank you so much for your support and for listening today.
Until next time.